Talk Show. Recorded live.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Community's Roundtable Podcast. This is podcast number 583. My name is Eric Nelson. With me today, I have my regular co-host, Matt Lungeth. Today is Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. Matt, how you doing today?
Eric, I am well. I am stuffed from all things Thanksgiving here in the U.S. I'm still having a little bit of the leftovers from what is just the last little bits that are still remaining of the mashed potatoes and gravy and stuffing balls and cranberry sauce and whatnot. I'm also pumped that we had a major release here on the Horizon platform for all of the EUC fans that are out there. The first extended service branch for Horizon 8, the 2111 release, dropped yesterday. That would be 11:30. So check over there on the digital Tech Zone workspace and whatnot for all of the release notes. It was the entire release for both the connection servers and UHEs and Horizon clients and whatnot. Lots of improvements, and I've just been going through all those different release notes and trying to figure out what all of the releases are and how they're going to be out there to be helping our customers. But enough of all of that, sir. The most important questions that we always ask. How are you? How is the weather out on the West Coast? And most importantly, what is the color of the bay?
Well, thanks, Matt. I think we're all stuffed with turkey over here as well. I think everybody on the planet is. People ask me, how was Thanksgiving? I say, absolutely horrible. I'm like, why? I'm like, because my family pinned me down and stuffed turkey down my throat, for like 3 days straight. We cooked a 25-pound turkey, and we had leftovers forever because there was only 5 of us at the meal. So that's like 5 pounds of turkey per piece. The weather is crystal clear here in the Bay Area. It is dry and sunny and in the 50s, so a little bit chilly, but beautiful. Color of the Bay is just like a smooth green. We only have a 1 mile an hour wind, so California is just crystal clear and nice. On the show today, we're going to be talking about disaster recovery technologies. We're lucky to have Guy Bartram here, Director of Product Marketing, VMware Cloud Providers. So Guy, we'll just say hi to you before we get into some news. But Guy, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me on. Really appreciate the time today. And by the way, I'm not stuffed with turkey. I'm based in the UK, so I got about 24 days left to wait before I get stuffed with turkey.
That's true. But you guys do a really good Christmas deal where you have the goose, the turkey. You probably put goose, turkey, chicken, and rabbit all together and make it into some kind of loaf thing and cut it up and eat it. Right? Like that's my take.
The bird and the bird and the bird.
Right.
Yeah,
bird and
I
bird,
think
the bird.
exists. Yeah.
Before we get into the topic, we do a little news and we'll say hello to Corey out there in Utah. I don't think they're allowed to eat turkey in Utah, right? It's illegal or something like that, right? So, but how's it going, Corey?
It's going good, yeah. Going well in Utah. A couple of it, or actually just one update this week for vExpert. I've got some emails coming out. There's some other updates, but this one I can announce now. So tomorrow, December 2nd, 8 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to have an exclusive vExpert webinar with Victor Maga from the vExpert security program. He's hosting this for all the vExperts, and the topic is protecting cloud applications with VMware security. It will be recorded and it will be emailed out to the vExperts once we're finished.
Awesome.
And Corey, are we still on track for vExpert applications as far as when they are going to open? We had originally talked about 12.6. Is that still on track, sir?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Announcing the application opening on December 6th. That's correct.
Okay. And then running through the 14th of January.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. As always, remember to, if you have questions about your application process for vExperts, reach out to your local vExpert Pro.
And before we get to Guy, Matt, I just got to say, is it crazy? It's already December and we're coming into the holiday season where you get some time off and you'll be able to geek out on some cool technologies through the holiday. I can't believe a whole year has already happened.
As we're recording this, AWS reInvent's going on. And I can remember that the last time that I think that maybe you and I got to see each other in person was reInvent from 19. And that doesn't seem all that far long ago. But, we're right on the cusp of everything with the pandemic. I think we might have been hearing some things coming out of of Wuhan at that point, but definitely not any lockdowns or anything to that extent. And to think that was not only are we in December, but that reInvent from 19 is now we're 2 years in, right?
Right.
Yeah. And we're back to in person with that event and whatnot. And obviously VMware has a presence out there with VMC on AWS and some of the things that they're offering with AWS Outposts and whatnot. But yeah, it's absolutely incredible. Here's another year.
I feel like we're Frodo and Sam sludging through Mordor, right? You know, like we think we're coming up the hill and all we got to do is throw the ring into the fire and everything will go.
I don't want to know what Samron is right now, though. I mean, if we're playing that route, right? Like if we're going to go up the mountain, ooh.
Yeah. All right. With that, welcome again, Guy. Guy, we always start out on a community podcast, ask you a little bit about yourself. How long you been at VMware? What do you do? And how did you get here? What's your career look like? We could take a few minutes here just to talk about who you are and how you got here.
Oh, sure. Okay. So I've been at VMware now for about 7 years. I've lived and worked in the UK pretty much most of my life. So I actually work for our cloud provider business unit, which is based out in Palo Alto. And I'm in marketing, right? So the dreaded marketeer, that's me. I'm the guy who kind of looks at all of the products that are in our VMware portfolio and converts those into subscription consumption for our cloud providers to service their customers as as a managed offering. And I've had a variety of roles in VMware since I started. I used to run our global cloud practice, strategy and advisory group. And these were guys who would go around to our cloud providers and really work with them on how to bring new solutions to market, how to price and package solutions, what GTM motions were needed, sales enablement, really the whole 9 yards to getting a product out into market to their customers, a VMware solution, obviously. And that was really interesting. I got to understand a lot about how our cloud providers use our solutions and the services they offer. Previous to that, I was at Computer Associates, where I was there for 7 years. And in Computer Associates, I started off as an architect. I moved into pre-sales and I moved into product management and ended up running their cloud platform for Fujitsu at the time. I guess my history going back past that is really working with independent software vendors doing service activation primarily, and working on primarily networking was my real background, working on DSLAMs, ATM, MPLS, and really, getting into the how does Juniper do it versus how does Cisco do it? How does Alcatel do it? And, the different configuration parameters and really the automation behind all of that was really where I came from.
Nice. I got to say, if you worked at CA, right, if you can survive at CA and thrive at CA, this is like thriving at Procter & Gamble in marketing, right? Like if you can do that, you can market anything, anywhere, right? Because CA is just like the razor sharp. We'll take any product and then we'll bundle it up and offer value to customers. So yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, I remember when we started, we had about, I think it was over 1,000 products in the portfolio. I mean, it was a lot to take on. We have around 90 now in our portfolio for our cloud providers. So, and believe me, that's enough. I don't want any more.
Yeah, well, you guys are booming. I mean, the cloud provider program in general, that's doing really well, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have been consistently growing, between sort of 20-40% year on year, and through the pandemic we've been growing as well, very much on a different vector, growing much higher than before as we see consumption ramp up in cloud and more workloads migrating to cloud from customer premises. The cloud provider market is slightly diversifying a bit in the moment, with cloud providers specializing in managed services and really changing the ball game a little bit with that traditional data center footprint that they have versus working in what we call an asset light environment. So providing services on a hyperscale like Azure or AWS or Google. There's a lot of demand for that. And this has kind of led to most cloud providers, nearly all, I would say, having multi-cloud skills and resources and strategies to help their customers, because the customers are typically coming to them and they've got 5 cloud providers already, or outsourced to 5 cloud environments already, and they need help to understand how they can optimize that, understand where their application journey is going, and critically how to protect that and secure it as well. So we've got over 4,000 providers, growing very fast, and we have this interesting kind of I wouldn't say it's like a split. We have a lot of new providers coming online who are doing pure asset light, and they are really challenging the traditional business, because they're able to move so much faster.
Guy, how do we define a cloud provider right now? Is it the true sense of a VAR, or could it be an enterprise that is now set up where they would be able to do back billing to their own internal BUs?
Yeah,
because we could obviously see where that would be a business model for internal IT services and IT consumption. How is VMware as an org do we define, and who gets classified into the partner program currently?
It's a great question. And many large enterprises, they use our core, the product I manage, Cloud Director. They use that within their organization, and they have done for many years, because it's very suited to that multiple tenant or multiple lines of business, which a large enterprise would have, and providing cloud services to them. The bottom line is, if you're providing managed services on infrastructure, then you can apply to become a VMware Cloud Provider Partner. You have to sign up to Partner Connect, and you have to agree to certain what's the word I'm looking for, when you have skills and resources and exams and
certifications and what, right, where we have to qualify the particular VAR to go through a certification and qualification process of what resources that they have available on staff. Sure.
Yeah, it's actually competencies was the word I was looking for. We have now solution competencies, which these cloud providers need to maintain. But we do get a lot of service providers still using, a lot of enterprises using Cloud Director, so becoming their own internal service provider. We've got lots of telecommunication companies using Cloud Director because it's perfect for radio access networks and a virtualization of the data plane. And we've got really quite a lot of hosters or a lot of ISVs. There's a real mixed bunch in there, as well as the classic cloud providers that you may have heard of, like Rackspace and OVH and those guys.
The platform itself really allows for a multitude of particular business models. I mean, it opens up of who we can consider to be that, in traditional the VAR space, because it's consumption in one way or another, right? Or whether we look at it from the traditional, VAR to the consumer, or large enterprise IT organization to internal assets.
I find that technology is wonderful, because I look at the cloud provider world and the whole cloud world, and I look at virtual currency like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin and AWS showed up, right? And everybody's Bitcoin, right? And then AWS Cloud. It's all AWS. But then as this has grown, people realize, wait, there's other services we can have. There's other features that we can have. That doesn't just have to be one cloud provider. This is an innovative space. And if you look at the virtual currency space, there's literally 20, 30 different virtual coin that's coming up, and you can create your own coin, and you can airdrop coin to other things for product sales. You can do all of a sudden this whole new way of doing business is at your fingertips, and you realize it's just not about Bitcoin, right? It's about the whole way of using virtual currency. And I look at cloud providers as the same way. It was first one big cloud. Everybody's, oh wow, we could off-prem everything into a cloud. But then you realize that these cloud partners can come and bring value for competencies to innovative ideas to help your business. And all of a sudden you can have a virtual currency. You can actually have a cloud practice, get certified, get competencies, and it makes the whole ecosystem really dynamic from a standpoint of building out solutions for customers, right? So it is a cool space.
It is, and one of the key things I kind of talk about a lot is the right cloud. We've traditionally had an all-into approach 5 years, 10 years ago, where everyone suddenly went into a hyperscale and discovered it wasn't so easy. We've also had, people going into individual service providers and then discovering they weren't getting, the cost or the performance they wanted or the breadth of portfolio they wanted. And now we're in that lovely situation where actually you can be in AWS, in Azure, in Google, in a private cloud provider, and have the whole interlinked mesh of something like HCX, for example, enabling you to have mobility across all those. So you've got that adjacency. You're able to use the best cloud for the job or the right cloud for the application. And cloud providers are really cashing in at the moment. There is a big shortage of cloud skills and resources in customers. And customers are not standing still. They're having to evolve. They're having to innovate. The more technology is taken up by their competitors, the more they have to get in front of that. And they're requiring and using cloud providers to help backfill a lot of that resource by inviting a cloud provider who delivers managed services into their environment, becoming like a virtual CIO for them. So the cloud provider is actually engaged with the programs and projects and aspirations for the business over the next term, and can support them with that and make the right cloud decisions. And that's really important. It's not just all a VMware cloud. It's not all a Azure cloud or AWS cloud. It's a mixture of all of them for the right reasons.
Sometimes it's not easy to jump right to one of those hyperscalers, even for large enterprise organizations, right? It's not only for what could be the initial cost for just even a small instance, but then there's that knowledge gap of where we have from on-premises practice to now moving out some of those workloads and migrating between the not only on-prem to up to one of the scalers, but then cross-scale, as we had talked about, once you're have moved the workloads over to one of the VMC platforms. I also like it from just a consumption standpoint, where even for a mid-size organization where a VMC on AWS instance at base cost per month isn't necessarily a cheap spend. Whereas now one of these VCPPs can go through and fractionalize that, right? They can split up the usage into even a smaller chunk and then offer that out to a mid-size organization, and then enable them to facilitate their cloud journey. Whereas if that mid-size organization would go right to one of the hyperscalers, it's a tremendous amount of cost from both the upfront for what the hyperscaler is charging, plus maybe the lack of knowledge from the in-house staff.
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned one really key thing and key principle for Cloud Direct to Service, which is the technology you're referring to, which is it runs in VMware Cloud and AWS, or it augments VMware Cloud and AWS infrastructure and layers across a multi-tenancy aspect to it. So you can have customers running on the same host. So your model has gone from being a host model to being a virtual resource model. And that has, we've got providers out there who are selling VMs as small as, 1 vCPU and 2 gig of RAM. This is completely customizable to the customer's needs. The nice thing about it as well is if you want to expand the resources that is available to that VM or that resource pool, you can do that instantly. Whereas you can't do that in another hyperscale environment. If you've bought a VM, that's your VM for 3 years, you probably bought it on a discounted price. You now got to sell that VM somehow and then migrate your workload to another VM. With Cloud Direct Service, we can just literally drag a slider and assign that VM more resource, change the allocation model on the fly. And that's some huge benefit to using a cloud provider to get that that economics and scale that you require, whether it's large or small, and remove that kind of host footprint from the equation, from the problem.
And Guy, we could certainly see, as the topic as we're talking about today, disaster recovery being a huge market for what you had just talked about, right? To be able to spin up that recovered VM on demand. And as it relates to VCD, can we walk through a little bit of the history of how the disaster recovery has fit into the product, and then sort of walk through of where it has evolved to today, and what we are available to offer through our provider program?
Sure. So VCD.
All right, I got to stop you for a second because I have one follow up to your point that you made, Guy. Right, then we'll go into do that, and I'll let you go, Matt. But I have one comment, which is, you talk, Guy, about spinning up VMs, right, and like the ability to dynamically change your workload, the amount of horsepower per workload, all that, which cloud providers gives you now. I get that, but one of the problems that I'm seeing is that then how well your data center runs, or how well you're offering up services, is all dependent on how cheap the manager is, right? And I look at my cloud that I've got set up, and I'm like, ooh, I want to save a little more budget. And so I'm like pulling off the CPU. I can take that down. I don't need that many gig of memory, and I don't need I can go to that small CPU. Nobody will notice. And I actually do that for the vExpert app, and I'm in here twiddling with the infrastructure settings to save my budget. So I can hit, we can go on a Christmas party if I just shave off a little bit of the horsepower. I just look at that and I go, oh my God, this is so crazy, right? Because I literally am doing that sometimes, right? And it brings up a whole nother problem of who's actually got the fingers on those knobs and what's driving them. I don't really want to answer to that. I just thought that was a long running joke that I see, because I look at it sometimes, and we've actually done that where we've turned down VM resources just so we could have an end of the year Christmas party. So, all right, with that, I will say, you can tell us about disaster recovery now.
I mean, just to finish that one off, because you're hitting on an interesting point. I mean, you could be the org admin for your customer, right? So you are the customer. And the nice thing about VCD is I can give you self-service. You can have it as a managed service, and I'll manage it for you, or I can give you self-service in it. If I'm going to give you self-service, it's probably not the best idea, because it sounds like you're going to be ramping up and down to meet your Christmas budget. But right. You are in control. So it's up to you how you want to play that.
It is fascinating, and you can squeeze out inefficiencies, right? And you can be dynamic as a controller of that. So it is a legitimate way to do it. I'm just telling some amount of humor.
I'm sure we'll get there, but you could absolutely see the use case of where we're going to. Why have dedicated resources for just a DR test? Of where we could spin up these DR tests on demand and the necessary resources to go through validation and check all the boxes, and then spin them down until the next validation process would come in, rather than paying for a flat monthly hosted rate, or the operations for a traditional secondary data center. And these cloud providers can offer that now as a very valuable service to save, to Eric's point, on what is that just idle spend of resources that are not necessarily in use.
Yeah, I think about maybe 5-10 years ago, larger enterprises who could afford it, had that secondary data center and had that compute just sitting there, basically doing nothing, waiting for a disaster. And it's a very expensive and inefficient way of doing things. And then hyperscalers came with their offering, but their offerings were, whilst able to replicate bits and bytes, the target environment you're replicating to just isn't vSphere. So you're going to have some conversions to do, some downtime, and that really hits your recovery time objective. If you're on a vSphere environment, the best target you can replicate to and test in is a vSphere.
It's another vSphere environment, sure.
Yeah.
Why have to do all the on-fly, the conversions, and all of the potential overhead that goes into that from both the technology side and the manpower side, plus the validations with it. Native to native is always best, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was a lot of kind of point and click DR offerings that flooded the market, and it seemed like it was a very easy thing to do. But as we know, moving a VM, a workload into any other cloud environment can be a challenge. And if you're trying to do that in a disaster, that's going to really impact your ability to get your business up and running quickly, which is essentially what we're trying to do. We're trying to rescue a business from a malware attack, a coolant leak in the server room, or power outage, or whatever it might be. We've got to get the VMs and the applications critically up and running as quick as possible. So in our environment, we have cloud providers, over 1,500 cloud providers today who deliver cloud services using VMware Cloud Director. And this provides great economies of scale to their customers because it enables secure multi-tenancy, and it pulls through a whole load of really cool application level stuff, as well as Kubernetes cluster services and Tanzu now. The portfolio is just constantly evolving for Cloud Director. But where Cloud Director came from, we originally didn't have a DR solution. When I started 7 years ago, there wasn't a DR solution. We have, and we still have a very strong ecosystem of ISVs who work with Cloud Director, the likes of Veeam, Cohesity, Rubrik, etc., providing a lot of backup and to a certain extent DR services. But we didn't have anything competitively in VCD from VMware's perspective. So we developed VMware Cloud.
A lot of third-party solutions that work well with VCD, but nothing baked into VCD itself.
Correct. Yeah. And for a service provider, that's great, but I've got another system to manage. I've got another UI to provide access control to. I've got another security issue and a place to ensure I have security and identity management working.
And costing and POs and I'm trying to whittle down what my particular package is for a user. Not only do I have to take my base VMware costs for our licensing model, plus now I have to roll in my third-party backup service and what they're charging me to ultimately come up with that bundled number that I'm trying to make the rip on, as we say, to get the revenue to make this all work. Where I'm sure is if we keep it as a bundled number all within our suite, that makes it a little bit easier as far as markup to the customer and making a profit for these VARs.
Yeah, and service providers, let's not beat around the bush, right? They are there to make profit.
That they are, as they should be.
And they do that by delivering services at scale on infrastructure that can be multi-tenanted, and they can really sweat the assets and get the efficiency out whilst delivering the service level that the customer wants. So VCDA came along, or Cloud Director Availability. I'll call it VCDA because we like to talk in acronyms here.
No, this company? No, not at all.
Yeah. It's terrible, isn't it? Well, I'm going to name some others in a minute. So, this is adding to a long line of DR kind of capabilities that we had stemming back from Site Recovery Manager, vSphere Replication, Hybrid Cloud Extender, and now VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, VCDR. And VCDA is really primarily there to support Cloud Director environments. It's not there to do vCenter to vCenter today. It doesn't do that. It's really for if you're on premise and you're a customer who wants to replicate your virtual machines or your workloads to a cloud. The simplest way to do it is to look in your vSphere console, and you'll see, if you're running the older versions of vSphere, you'll see a DR as a service tab. Or if you're running some new ones, you'll see Cloud Provider Services. You click on that, you'll get the list in the newer one, or a newer plugin. You'll get a list of your providers who are DR validated, i.e. they're running Cloud Director and Cloud Director Availability, and they can be a target for you to replicate to. In the newer version, you get that on a IP distance space, so you're not going to be replicating across the pond to some very expensive bandwidth or very slow replication. And these cloud providers are there with Cloud Director, often very, very large environments, managing at scale, and you can simply, it's a one appliance deployment on-prem. The great thing about it being vSphere is we're using vSphere replication in the ESXi, so we don't have any agents to deploy. We have an appliance that takes care of the replication, the tunnel, and you can then start replicating to your target org virtual data center in Cloud Director at your cloud provider.
And Guy, is that a one-size-fits-all appliance, or depending on what we're trying to replicate, do we need to, pick the particular size that would be appropriate for given what we're trying to replicate?
It's a one-size-fits-all, and it manages very competently with the amount that we've pushed for it in engineering tests and the reality of what we've seen customers doing as well. On the service provider side, they have the option to deploy different sizes, but again, they typically just go with the normal large, which isn't really a large footprint. It's not doing much compute overhead at this point. And yeah, that just, you've got the tunnel, which provides you the security of data in transit. You've got the ability to encrypt your VMs and workloads at VCD at the target end as well. So you've got encryption of data at rest if you wish. And this solution is synchronous. So you can access your on-prem plugin, or you can access your self-service UI and VCD at the cloud provider site. And you can access this and see exactly the situation at both ends with protections and migrations and the status of everything, and execute jobs at both ends synchronously. So you can execute on-prem to cloud DR or reverse DR from cloud to on-prem to fail back. And you can do that at either end. So it's a really good solution for customers who want to manage on-prem, but also if you can't manage on-prem because on-prem's down, then you need
right.
To
if the bell's being rung and we're calling Sev1 and I don't have my console up anymore, how do I get to actually recover? And now we're moving over to the VCPP's console to then orchestrate what would be the recovery.
Yeah, exactly. So the replication itself, I mean, if I also take a step back, when we're looking at where this has come from like I mentioned, right, we're using vSphere replication. We're using the IO filter on the ESXi host to kind of read out the blocks and change blocks and calculate checksums. And then we're sending that IO filtered data across to the appliance, which is the replicator service and the tunnel. That then transmits it across the wide area network link, whether that's dedicated or over the internet, and that'll end up at the target side destination tunnel, which will then in turn get one of the key differences we do at this point is we create what's called a PIT, a point in time instance. And it is basically a delta on the disk itself. So we're not taking snapshots at the source side. We're actually taking deltas and copying the deltas across to the target end. And then when we've done an initial sync, we've got a full disk image. Everything else from that point on is what we call MPITs, multiple point in time instances. And
so we're not stunning that via traditional snapshots any of the VMDKs at this point.
Correct. We're not stunning anything, and that's why.
And then all of the advantages of a non-stun snapshot-based routine are pluses here in this instance. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Stunning a VM is quite a disruptive task to do to a VM, and many applications don't particularly like being stunned. Just as many applications don't particularly like being coerced, and you often have coercing issues. So the fact that we use Delta VMDKs has an advantage in that respect. It also has an advantage in terms of you can keep up to 24 instances of a PIT. So 24 MPITs can be kept before we then reconsolidate the disk. So every 24, we cycle through and we come back to point number 1. At that point, we consolidate the disk and then start the cycle again. And future, when you've done that initial sync and you've got everything kind of replicated to the target site. You're now doing the delta changes from when you started the initial sync to when you finished it, and then you're doing the delta changes on your recovery point objective. So if you've got a RPO of 5 minutes, then every 5 minutes you'll be doing a delta, and that delta will not, if you've added a file and deleted the file within that 5 minutes, it won't be in the delta. It will only take what is actually at that RPO time as the change blocks. So it's different from journaling in that respect. We're not capturing every single transaction that has changed. And I think when you look at, and I wrote a blog on this around the replication types to think about, journaling or deltas. And
to that, we'll include this over in the notes, and for those viewing along on YouTube, I'm sure that Julia can put it over here in the banner. It's over at blogs.vmware.com/cloud provider. And the title of the particular entry is Disaster Recovery Technologies Discussed, Journaled or Delta. And a very detailed look through this particular topic.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I started this because I wanted to explore the technologies a little bit more. We often hear, oh, you're snapshotting VMs, and after diving into the detail with engineering, we weren't snapshotting at all. Deltas and the MPIT process is not a snapshot. It's not using snapshots at all. And we often hear about granularity. While you can't do like a sub 10-second RPO, yeah, we can't, and actually, I don't think anyone can. Even if you're journaling, the amount of bandwidth and your requirements around disk speeds, we've now reduced our RPO to 1 minute. And with 1 minute comes a significant amount of, you've got to have all flash, you've got to have certain networking, you mustn't be more than 75% utilized on your compute, on your flash storage. There's all sorts of things you've got to think about, because you're writing every minute a delta, and if you've got that happening 100 times across all your tenants, or 400 times across all your tenants, that's a lot of disk writes and disk reads, and every 24 minutes you're going to be consolidating that into a VMDK. So it's quite a significant amount of processor overhead that you would be looking at, and this is where I think the discussion.
I have a quick, an aside there from the service provider side. Do we allow I'm sure that there's some underlying technology where we allow our own storage cluster or own particular array, whether that's through vSAN, through SPBM or whatnot, that just does nothing more than MPIT allocations? So for where you have these intensive read-write operations where you would have just a dedicated array that does nothing more than storage of those deltas?
That could be one of the ways that you should look at it. Yeah. I mean, if you're investing in a 1 minute RPO, you're investing in a mission critical solution that you're offering, and that needs to come at a price. For most people, 15 minute is fast.
This is one of those things where the executive or a senior director might say, we want the RTO and RPO down at 1 minute, right? And then they look at the cost and go, yeah, maybe not.
As I say, in case Christmas is coming up, then we start making other choices. 3 minutes is fine.
There you go. Yeah, you want another turkey for Christmas, or you want your group day out to a restaurant or something. Yeah, you can need to save some cost there. I think there is a granularity versus cost conversation to have, and there is also a minimizing data loss but increasing recovery time conversation to have as well. When you're looking at deltas, you are going to have missing periods between the RPOs where you're not going to have necessarily, if you've got a 10-minute RPO, what happened at 5 minutes you don't have. You just have what happened at the 10-minute delta. And with a journaling technology, of course, you have the whole thing. But then you've got an RTO, which is your recovery time objective. if I'm having to trawl back through essentially a whole load of logs and redo logs, I'm actually going to massively
rewind the tape, so to say. If we're writing
Yeah,
the journal
exactly.
down, right? If we're recording that, I think of the old, and I'm really dating myself here, that the 8-track where we're recording what's being laid down as far as the rights to the disc. We have to go back to some point, right? And then we're replaying what that sequence is, or we're essentially undoing the tape. We're turning the recorder back. We're rewinding and then pressing play. And there's time for all of that mechanism to happen as we're doing that journaling. Whereas with the MPITs, I'm sure because we're doing this in block-sized chunks, right? That's a little bit more efficient.
It is more efficient, and this is what I mean around the granularity versus the cost versus the RPO kind of discussion, RTO discussion that you need. My view on things like malware is you've got to get up and running as quickly as possible. Do I want to spend time rewinding and pressing play? Am I in the right place? Rewind again, press play. It's going to take a long time, and even with deltas, it's still going to take a long time. You're going to be recovering multiple points in time to see if they are malware free at that point or Trojan horse free at that point, or however it's embedded itself. Whereas you actually, all the time you're not up and running, it's costing the business money. So there is a trade-off between we can have an acceptable loss, and this is where when you said it, Matt, right, around the investment in the infrastructure to support 1 minute RPO or a 10-second RPO, it has to become a trade-off then on how how much you're willing to pay to get that level of recovery. And actually, in testing we've done, we with a 1 minute RPO, it's significant and enough the amount of overhead that applies on your infrastructure. Journaling may be able to achieve lower RPOs, but in fact, even journaling consolidates before it sends over a wide area network because it can't constantly stream that data across a wide area network. So there is even consolidation in journaling. And what we found is the moment you start writing data, your RTO increases exponentially. And even with our solution on a 1 minute RPO, we could go a lot faster, 10 seconds, probably without any trouble at all, if there's no data being written. The moment data gets written, both deltas and journaling both get hit.
And this goes into that particular analysis that needs to be done by those backup administrators of classification of systems. Sure, there can be necessary systems out there that are very write intensive. I think of SQL databases and whatnot, where it would absolutely maybe necessitate that low RPO need, right? Where we're doing things like a journaling or whatnot, or mirroring those deltas down to a very, very low time. But for some other systems where it's out there, where it's a very low change rate, sure, we can classify those off to a secondary tier, a tertiary tier, and then even for systems of low change rate, we could move those off to other tiers. And that's part of the process. And I would think that the discussion that you would have with any one of these competent service providers, that they would be able to then consolidate these out and help you walk through as that backup administrator of defining what service levels that you need and the necessary RTOs and RPOs for these different classification levels.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that classification tends to happen with a service provider doing an assessment. Pretty much no service providers will offer this out without doing any sort of communication with the customer and finding out exactly what's in the workload estate. Because the first thing the customer is going to ask for is, what's your fastest RPO? And he's going to say, well, it's 5 minutes or it's 1 minute. I'll have that. Okay. You do realize it's going to cost a fortune, et cetera. And it has a whole load of, overheads that we need to account for. Okay. So, and the question should be then, well, why do you think you need a 1 minute RPO? What is the data that you're trying to protect? And that's where the skills and resources of the service provider who understand these applications already can come in. And using a product like Cloud Director Availability, we have something called SLA profiles. So the cloud provider can create their gold, silver, bronze offering with different RPOs and RTOs, and also something called retention periods. And this is really governing the consolidation of instances that we carry out and how we keep them. And they can tier this service to, a generic offering. So they have a gold, silver, bronze as generic to everyone. But then they can allow customers to create their own. So if the customer's got a particular intensive workload that would benefit from a fast RPO and a fast RTO, then they can actually configure that themselves, or they can allow the customer to configure themselves, or they can offer it as a managed service. But fundamentally, assigning the right level of protection against the application is exactly what you're discussing there with the tiers and workload profiles.
So I'm assuming that there's something in VCDA that would take those PITs and roll them back into a consolidated base image, and then we could move that off to some type of archival tier?
Yeah, we have something called stored instances. And these are basically, you can take any PIT you like, and it's literally, think about it, taking a copy of that PIT in the cycle and then just farming it off somewhere. And that's essentially what stored instances does. So yeah, we have that ability to then control how long you want to keep those stored instances and where you want to keep them.
And so then what does the recovery process look like at that point? Let's say that we find out that there's malware that's been running loose for 30 some days, and now we're back into an archival strategy where I have to go back and pull one of these consolidations of the PITs. How does that process work, and then how do we start to bridge the deltas back in, and how does that figure into the RTO process?
So for the recovery, you're always going to need your source disk to recover from. So fundamentally, don't delete the workload. You're gonna need that source disk there. We'd pull a stored instance, or you'd get presented basically with a list of the instances available to recover from. You select which instance you would like to recover from, and then the service itself is going to do the analysis of the differential between Delta and the source disk. And then it's going to work out what to push back and create. And you can then, recover to different networks. You can recover in different orderings. There's also run books that we recently released, which allow you to do stepped processes and things like that. So there's a lot of control over, recovery, whether it's a migration failover, or if it's a DR recovery or failback operation.
Guy, we often talk, in the modern, malware instances about immutability, right? About what we can do for, long-term retention. And we even see it's coming out of now as far as some, security advisories or best practice reviews, or where it would be required where we're doing some type of immutable stores. Does this particular scenario allow a cloud provider to offer immutability for these backups?
Yeah, today it's something we don't do. It is something we're looking at doing. Obviously, in the VMware disaster recovery portfolio, we have Cloud Director availability. We do have, not Cloud Director availability. We have VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, which does offer you access to long-term object storage, which is immutable, and that can enable fast recovery to a VMC node, whether it's if you want super fast recovery, you need to have a pilot node up and running. Otherwise, you can just recover and build the nodes as you go. And that's, the difference here is we've got SRM, which does, vSphere to vSphere or vCenter to vCenter, and that can be used for on-prem to a cloud provider. We've got cloud providers still doing SRM. It doesn't integrate with VCD though, so it's separate from that. So if a cloud provider is just running a vCenter environment, then they can use SRM. SRM also handles on-prem to VMware Cloud and AWS and other VCF endpoints. We now have VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, which does on-prem to VMware Cloud and AWS. and that actually backs off that storage into object storage, and you then have a very fast kind of remote mount from that pilot light node in VMware Cloud and AWS to bring up your data from the S3 object storage. And that's really nice because you can test your instance pretty quickly. Your recovery time objective is fast from that remote mount. All of the whether you're doing kind of remote mounts or you're looking at deltas, there's always going to be a overhead of compute whilst that is uncompressed, whilst it's unencrypted, or it's rehydrated in some way. A lot of backup vendors use rehydration. It's pretty fast, but there is still a compute overhead, and you have to take that in consideration. And then
we're always rewinding the tape or doing the playback in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just the nature of how all this works. They're obviously with journaling, it's one method. With using these pits, it's something else. But there is always some type of a playback mechanism to bring you back to the state that you need to be in.
Absolutely.
And cost associated with that. The quicker the playback, where you can jump right to the particular part in the track that you need to, you might need to pay a little bit more for it.
Yeah, and I think you've got to consider other forms of like the whole data protection aspect. If you're looking at databases, then you're going to have high availability pairs, potentially high availability across different sites. Then you're going to have, your next level down in priority is disaster recovery. And then your next level down from that is backup.
Yeah, this is just another tool in the backup administrator's portfolio, right? We don't look at this as necessarily the be-all to end-all solution. This is just another weapon in the portfolio to say of how do we protect from malware threats and DR events and whatnot, and how we can leverage through best costing and through a myriad of offerings that now allow, frankly, cloud providers to compete against one another to offer the best service and performance, or that niche scenario that might be out there for a particular enterprise customer, to then equip them to deal with these different scenarios that they may need to plan for as part of their disaster recovery orchestration.
Yeah. And just reminded me something actually that I should have mentioned earlier was our cloud providers, obviously they have access to this ecosystem of vendors. And we have two ecosystem partners we play with quite closely, Veeam and Cloudian. And Veeam obviously backup, restore, DR, and Cloudian does S3 object storage with a product called Hyperstore. And they're providing S3 services. It is the closest S3 service in terms of API similarity to AWS from any other vendor. So if you're used to using AWS S3 APIs, exactly the same APIs are available in Cloudian. So from that perspective, you can have a service provider, and this is really where service providers start to differentiate a bit. They can provide their own S3 object storage, immutable disaster recovery and backup solution with Cloudian, Veeam, and Cloud Director. And we're seeing a lot more of this type of behavior.
Where normally we would have to be in two or three different instances where we're own billing and setup and whatnot, and where now we can, and I say we, being that medium-sized enterprise, large enterprise, and whatnot, we have that one point of contact to offer all of that product portfolio, and that's something that I think only a cloud provider is in the position to do.
Absolutely. And we've made it as easy as we possibly can with the plugin framework that we've designed for Cloud Director. I think one of the key points is, and maybe this applies a bit more to the folks in EMEA and APJ, is now we're seeing a lot of concern around sovereign data. And, when we're looking at American hyperscaler companies, they're American owned and operated and hence under American jurisdiction, wherever they are in the world. And some companies now are becoming more concerned about where their data is. And
GDPR, certainly.
Yeah, and looking to their cloud providers to provide those localized services that they would expect from hyperscalers. So, cloud providers are now having to work with things like Cloudian S3 object storage and provide a similar level, if not, the same level of capability that you get from a native AWS S3 service. And this is, I think, where it's really interesting for our customers out there to talk to cloud providers to find out what they offer, because I think everyone will be pleasantly surprised that the portfolio is not just about hosting and just moving a workload. We've progressed into applications, into machine learning, grids, GPUs, Kubernetes, you name it. All of these things are now available through our cloud providers.
Yeah. It's great to hear all this. I feel like a little bit of, we shouldn't call this disaster recovery anymore. We should have a new term, because it really is about data center and, IT infrastructure, high availability at all times.
Data mobility, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In some ways,
right.
more than some, but frankly, that's what it is. It's not
it used to be right. We'd have to worry about when somebody kicked out a plug, or when an earthquake happened and you wanted to go to a fire happened. Right now, it's just a more complex environment with cloud and security attacks and everything. So it's just part of this infrastructure. We're out of time, as it turns out. We're coming up to the top of the hour here, and so for the last 5 minutes, we'll usually ask you, Guy, how do people follow you? I know you've got the blog that you blog on occasion on the Cloud Provider blog, obviously. Are you on Twitter? How else do people learn about these topics?
I don't do any. I am on Twitter. You can find me on all of the social networks. Just search out my name. I'll be there. But I do a lot of posting on the blog site. That's where you'll find all of the cloud provider solutions that customers would be interested in knowing more about. We post there every week. We've got 3 or 4 posts a week. So watch the blog site, because that's kind of our main way of communicating out.
All right. So cloud provider at blogs.vmware.com, and Guy Bartram, Bartram. Look at him. Are you for Twitter at Guy Bartram? What is your Twitter handle? When I go make you do that, I'm going to
make me go and check now.
While we talk the last few minutes, we're going to do a V barbecue report, and we'll come back to get Guy's Twitter handle. So I know that Tony Foster's been talking to me about barbecue. We had all the turkey stuff last week, and if somebody talks to me about turkey again, I'm gonna throw up. So Tony Foster, I know you're out there, and I know that you barbecued something that wasn't turkey.
Yes, definitely, and that's why we barbecued it. So this week, had our fill of turkey, so we barbecued ahi tuna steaks, and it was absolutely wonderful to change from the turkey to something that's absolutely not turkey.
And are you doing charcoal? Are you doing
for a few minutes?
Are you doing charcoal? And just a few minutes. And do you leave it a little bit tender inside? And what sauce do you put on the outside?
So I am a purist. It is charcoal for me. Otherwise, it's not really grilling. So it is charcoal. I do leave it a little pink on the inside, and I use a dry seasoning called Tony Sachery. It's a Cajun seasoning, and it turns out absolutely phenomenal. I don't do any sauce. They stand on their own, especially when you put them on a bed of rice. It's just a wonderful change from turkey.
Excellent. Sounds great, light, and something nice to do if you want to be a little bit healthy between now and when Christmas multi-meat duck thing that Guy's going to be cooking in the UK. Get some healthy, nice fish going. Guy, I saw that you did give us, and I posted on the social channels, VMware TV and V Barbecue, your Twitter handle, which is at Guy Bartram. A really unique name there. Good job. I like that. Hard to remember that one, Guy. You had to go look it up, did you?
I managed to get there early enough to reserve it.
Yeah, I missed that boat. So now I'm Eric and I Pro for eternity. Guy, we always loop back to our guest. You're in the UK, so you have to do it with an umbrella, I would assume. So do you barbecue? And if so, what do you do over there?
Yeah, I barbecue a lot in the summer. I don't barbecue in the winter. It's too cold and it's too wet. And it's just like that now. So I actually gave up eating red meat about 6 years ago. So I eat chicken and turkey, but that's about it. And obviously fish, do a lot of fish. But my favorite barbecue is actually unusually something I made with my daughter, who's also a vegetarian. She's a pure vegetarian. I'm what they call a pescatarian, I think. We made a portobello mushroom chili burger. It was just, I've never found the recipe again.
Wow.
It was one of those online recipes, just a random one I tried, and it was superb. Yeah. So I love my barbecuing. Don't get to do it enough in the UK, unfortunately.
We do portobello mushroom. We put cheese and spinach on it, like a cheese spinach mix, which is pretty good. But I'm gonna have to go try that. Chili portobello.
Chili. You gotta have plenty of chili in there, man. Absolutely.
That sounds great. Now the problem is your chili must not have any hamburger like chili. I immediately go to hamburger with beans and red sauce. But you have to. Do you do a turkey chili? I guess that would defeat the idea of having a portobello mushroom if your chili actually had meat in it. But what is your chili then? Just bean and red sauce? I guess that would go.
No, I'm just talking about chili. So some ghost chili or whatever chili you got.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, just throw it in. It's
Matt,
pretty much anything you can throw in. All sorts of vegetables, whatever.
Matt, does that inspire you to get some charcoal?
No, it doesn't. Because I have more concern about you putting beans in your chili than anything that between gas and
I
charcoal.
Clearly do not understand what chili is.
There's no beans in any chili that I know of.
I was wondering about that one.
Really? We go to the Palo Alto Chili Cook-Off every year, and that's a common ingredient is chili beans, right? You're like,
Do you think isn't that a Mexican chili dish?
Texas chili. A good Texas chili has no beans.
I grew up in California, right? Exactly. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot.
More arguments for another day. Guy, thanks for being with us. A great episode. We really appreciate you being on. Follow Guy at Guy Bartram on Twitter and check out the cloud provider blog over on blogs.vmware.com.
And I think next week we've got PowerShell on deck, so it should be fun to listen to next week's show as well. Until then, get your Christmas shopping done early or whatever your holiday shopping is, and we'll be back again next week. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Cheers.